With all the short-term demand factors, Sandbox's market dominance, and the low token price, the Sand token is shaping up to be an amazing short-term and long-term investment, and I think you'll be kicking yourself if you miss it. Hello everybody and welcome. Today we're going to talk about what the Sandbox is, why it's set to explode, and what's going to happen to the Sand token in both the near and long term. Let's start with what is the Sandbox. Essentially, the Sandbox is a metaverse game that is powered by blockchain technology. In this game world, you control an avatar that interacts with creations that are developed and owned by other players. The Sandbox's in-game currency is the Sand token, and this is used for in-game purchases, staking rewards, as well as for voting rights in governance of the Sandbox ecosystem. We'll dive into the bullish aspects of the Sand token in just a minute. The Sandbox world is made up of 166,464 individual parcels of land. If these parcels of land are next to each other, they can be combined and turned into an estate for an individual player. These pieces of land are sold off as part of auctions. Land can be used to build upon, rent, or host events, and access to land can be charged. Also note that Sandbox is in alpha right now, which means it hasn't been fully released. Now there's a lot more to know about the Sandbox in-game world, but this is all we really need to know for a price prediction of the Sand token. We'll get onto the price prediction of the Sand token in just a minute, but first, let's look at the demand factors for the Sandbox game. There is already plenty of demand for the Sand token, as some of the biggest companies in the world are buying huge estates and assets in-game. These big brands will want to have a powerful say when governance of the Sandbox is given to the community DAO. And since the voting power on the DAO is based on how much sand an individual player holds, these big brands will want to be holding onto a lot of sand. As a result, when the DAO releases, I would expect to see a huge demand spike from all these big brands buying a lot of sand. Now the Sandbox plan to release this DAO in Q2 of 2022. Obviously, they missed this date. The Sandbox company has a reputation of missing its development timeline, and given its track record in the past, I would expect this DAO to be released anytime between now and the end of 2023. Another demand factor for the Sand token is land auctions. As everybody and their grandma wants to own some of the land in Sandbox, when these auctions happen, there's a massive surge in demand for the Sand token, like the surge we saw in November of 2021. On top of these two demand factors, Sand is an essential component in the creation of in-game assets and the earning of catalyst and gems. Catalysts and gems can only be generated through the staking of the Sand token. Without going into too much detail, these two commodities determine how rare and powerful your in-game creations are. Now you can imagine that if you own a large estate in the Sandbox, you're going to want a lot of sand, gems, and catalyst in order to create all the in-game assets you need to populate your land. The last demand factor I'll mention is the bottled up in-game transaction demand. Given that the Sandbox is still in alpha and only about 200,000 of the 2 million players registered to play in this Sandbox have actually been in the game, we can see that only about 1/10 of the in-game transaction demand has actually come through. Not to mention the trickle-on effect this has on asset creation and other in-game activities which require the Sand token. But now that we've gone through the demand factors, let's take a quick look at the tokenomics and see what this is going to do in terms of a price prediction for the Sand token. There's a max supply of 3 billion Sand tokens, of which 1.3 billion are already in circulation. Every 6 months, another 300 million are released into circulation, with the final emission being in January of 2025. It's important to note though that there's a lot of demand for staking Sand token, which means that in the long term, the circulating supply of sand is actually going to be quite low. This will have the effect of increasing the price of any circulating Sand token. But now the exciting part. Let's see if we can get a little bit of a price prediction for the Sand token. Sandbox is looking to take a sizable portion of the global gaming market, with an emphasis on the mobile gaming market. Globally, the gaming industry will be worth about $500 billion by 2030, but the mobile gaming industry will make up about $275 billion of that total value. As we've seen with games like Candy Crush and Pokemon Go, the potential for a single game to dominate the mobile market is definitely there. But unlike these two games, I believe Sandbox has a far more expansive experience that will retain its user base for far longer. As in, it's not going to be some 2-week fad like those other games were. So if we use these other games as a precedent, we can assume that Sandbox will get about 20% of the market share of the mobile gaming industry. And while it might garner a little bit of a user base on the other platforms, I don't think it's going to be a meaningful amount, given that these other platforms have far better games to play. With all the short-term demand factors, Sandbox's market dominance, and the low token price, the Sand token is shaping up to be an amazing short-term and long-term investment, and I think you'll be kicking yourself if you miss it. By 2030, Sandbox could see a 20% market share of the mobile gaming market. This would equate to about $50 billion in demand for the Sand token, meaning each token would be worth approximately $18. Although I'm expecting it to far exceed this because I think it might have a larger market share of the mobile gaming market, as well as all the staking demand required for the asset creation in-game. Also, in the next bull run, it wouldn't surprise me if we saw the price go far beyond $18 based purely on speculative demand. So does this mean I'm 100% bullish on the Sand token and that you should definitely buy it? Not quite. Let's look at some of the concerns I have about the project. My biggest concern is the game is just not that good. Right now, the game is in alpha, which means that it's barely functional and pretty far away from a full wide release. If you actually take a look at some of the gameplay, you see how bare bones and featureless the game currently is. This means that there's a heck of a lot of in-game development to happen in the next 2.5 years before the vesting schedule stops paying the Sandbox company to develop the game. And given that the game in its current state took 10 years to build, this is going to be a very tight time frame. The other really big concern for me is competition. The Sandbox won't be the king of the metaverse. It's a very childish looking game that's perfect for the mobile platform, but isn't really going to expand outside of that. Like if you take a look at the video that Facebook released detailing what the metaverse would be, it looks nothing like the Sandbox, and this is what people want from the metaverse. And as a result, as technological developments occur, the metaverse is going to be on some other platform. Although when this more capable metaverse comes along, I think that Sandbox is still going to own the mobile gaming market quite thoroughly. This means that that demand for the token is probably not going to go anywhere, but it's just not going to see some kind of crazy 1000x in my opinion. So while I'm not 100% bullish on the Sand token, I'm still going to be allocating a small amount of my portfolio to it. But while I'm doing this, I'm going to be keeping a close eye on how that development goes. And I'm going to be investing in this other 100x token I think you should take a look at. Otherwise, toodles.